Nevaeh, baby. Sis, listen. Pull up a chair. This is the part everybody scrolling their feed is missing. After weeks of nothing, a man logged onto a live stream, dragged the mic close, and calmly, without raising his voice 1 degree, told Blueface to his forehead that history was about to run him over. And baby, the second Taboo opened his mouth, the timeline stopped breathing at the exact same time. Because Taboo didn't come with a diss track. Taboo didn't come shouting. Taboo didn't perform a single ounce of outrage. Taboo came with a pattern. And once Taboo laid that pattern on the floor in front of a live audience, y'all could not unsee it. Not one of you. And I promise you, by the end of this breakdown, you're going to understand exactly why Taboo just ended one of the loudest relationships on this app without ever lifting his voice, why Blueface is currently standing in a burning kitchen and hasn't smelled the smoke yet, and why the DNA envelope that everybody is waiting on this fall is not the reveal that the internet thinks it is. Now peep this, because we have to start here or nothing else lands right. When something genuinely surprises your brain flags it as an outlier and shelves it away. It becomes a story you tell once and forget in 3 weeks. But when something doesn't surprise you, when a stranger describes a public figure you've been watching for 6 months, and every beat lines up with what you already sketched in pencil in your own head, that is a completely different animal. That is the moment gossip stops being gossip and hardens into a public record. That is when commentary crosses over into confirmation. And baby, confirmation moves faster than any bombshell has ever moved on this platform. A bombshell begs you to react. A bulletin asks you to remember. Taboo didn't drop a bombshell on Nevaeh. Taboo filed a bulletin. Flat tone. Zero performance. Zero shouting. And a bulletin, if you file it right, always lands harder than a bombshell, because a bulletin bypasses the argument entirely and drops straight into your memory. Everything Taboo said about Nevaeh this week wasn't a look what I just found out. It was a look what you already knew. And that is exactly why the reposts hit at the speed they hit. That is exactly why the comment sections filled up in 6 hours instead of 6 days. Taboo wasn't breaking news on Nevaeh. Taboo was ratifying it. And in the influencer economy, family, ratifying a story is more dangerous than reporting one, because you cannot sue somebody for agreeing with a room that had already made up its mind. Real quick, before we go 1 inch deeper, if you've been rocking with the channel, do me the smallest favor in the world. Tap that like, tap subscribe, and turn that little bell on, because the paternity math on this Nevaeh and Blueface arc is about to need its own live dashboard, and I am building it in real time right here. Alright. Big breath. Let's ride. August 2026. Los Angeles. A rapper going by Taboo, orbit adjacent to the HMG circle, sits down on a live stream and finally addresses the pile of tea he says he has been swallowing since Nevaeh's name first got stitched to Blueface. The subject. The history. The habits. And one very pointed, very calm warning fired straight at the father of Nevaeh's unborn child. And this is the tell that made the whole clip stick to my ribs. Taboo did not yell it. That is the piece that changes everything. Yelling would have been easy. Yelling would have made Taboo dismissible. Just another loud X on another loud stream in another loud month of the Nevaeh cycle. Instead, Taboo picked the register that hurts the most in an economy that is built entirely on volume. Taboo picked quiet. Taboo picked the tone people use when they have already grieved the outcome and they're just narrating it for the record. That register is expensive. That register requires you to have already processed the pain. And the delivery told me Taboo had been running that monologue in the shower for months, not just the 2 or 3 weeks Taboo copped to on air. There is an old rule in tabloid coverage, and I keep coming back to it on this arc. The calmer the source, the more prepared the source. Loud sources are reacting. Quiet sources are revealing. Taboo on that stream was not reacting to Nevaeh. Taboo was releasing something on a schedule Taboo had already built for himself. And Taboo dropped it into the middle of a Blueface news cycle that could not have been more perfectly designed to amplify it if Taboo had cut a check for the placement. Which is a question that deserves you to sit with longer than most reposters will. Let's start with what Taboo actually said, not what people are already twisting it into. On why Taboo broke the silence at all, the delivery is dry as bone. 2-3 weeks of silence, Taboo says, and the timeline still finds a way to run Taboo's name in the mud every day. Flat delivery. Taboo sounds tired. Genuinely tired. And then Taboo pivots. And here is the line that has been ricocheting across every repost account for a full 7 days. Any woman who does not respect her own father, Taboo argues, cannot possibly respect a man she meets in her 20s. That is the thesis. Everything else in the clip is testimony beneath the thesis. And I want y'all to sit with that word thesis for a beat, because what Taboo is doing structurally, whether Taboo consciously knows it or not, is presenting an argument in the exact shape of a legal opening statement. Thesis first. Supporting testimony second. Character context third. Preemptive rebuttal to the counterargument fourth. Strip the ad-libs, clean the audio, and you have a document you could physically file. That is not the shape of a random rant. That is the shape of something prepared. And whoever prepared Taboo knew the second the internet clipped that one line about the 20s, the rest of the argument would ride shotgun into every group chat in the country. On the NBA Youngboy piece, where Taboo claims Nevaeh spilled inside information, the details get ugly fast. Taboo claims Nevaeh said Youngboy wasn't really like that. Said Youngboy would tell his own homies to shut up and go sit in a separate room. Taboo then flips the frame with surgical precision. If Nevaeh is now tolerating Blueface talking to her sideways on a live stream, Taboo argues, then whatever went down in Utah with Krisian must have been worse than any tabloid ever managed to catch. And that flip is wild for one very specific reason. The Utah reference isn't decorative. The Utah house arrest era is one of the most surveilled stretches of modern rap. Every visitor, every guest, every unlogged night is sitting inside a federal record somewhere. Dropping a Utah claim onto a live stream in 2026 is planting a flag on a timeline other people can go dig up. Taboo didn't gossip. Taboo dared somebody with actual receipts to come and fact-check him. On the money accusation, the one where Nevaeh allegedly floated that Taboo had been asking her for cash, Taboo's response is almost bored. What does Taboo look like asking a woman with nothing for money, Taboo asks, and then loops right back around to the washer, the dryer, the empty house, the food that never got cooked. Domestic receipts. Small. Specific. Half-laughed. No follow-up needed. That washer and dryer beat is the one that has been chewing on me since I first watched the clip. In every celebrity fallout, you get grand narrative receipts. The leased car, the disputed jewelry, the mystery apartment. What Taboo brought instead was appliance-tier evidence. A washer. A dryer. An empty kitchen. Food that never got cooked. Those aren't clout receipts. Those are lived-in receipts. Those are details you don't invent, because inventing them wouldn't cross your mind. And the specificity, that it wasn't jewelry, wasn't cash, wasn't a car, but laundry, is the exact kind of detail that makes a metaphorical jury lean forward. Then Taboo hits the EBT beat, and the delivery cracks into a small, tired laugh. Nevaeh said she never had EBT, so how was she eating? Taboo asks it and Taboo laughs at his own question, because Taboo knows how that answer sounds coming from a man who says Nevaeh was allegedly using his apartment as a laundromat. And notice what Taboo does after that laugh. Taboo goes silent. Taboo picks silence a lot in this monologue. And silence in the parasocial economy is the single most expensive currency in circulation. Every second Taboo does not fill, the audience fills for him. And they fill it with context they already have. Old clips. Prior receipts. Collective memory of every previous Nevaeh cycle. Taboo isn't selling the room a story. Taboo is letting the room open the search bar in their own heads. That is a magician's move. Clout chasers are terrified of silence. Silence to a clout chaser is a mirror. Silence to Taboo is a weapon. And here is where the timeline starts talking on its own, y'all. February 2026. Blueface confirms the pregnancy on a stream, holding up 2 positive tests, calling it a Blueface baby. March. Jaden Alexis sends well wishes through visibly gritted teeth. April. Nevaeh publicly commits to a DNA test to put the paternity questions to bed. July. Blueface admits on Kick that he cheated with Krisian. July 31st. The TMZ story lands with that Blueface quote that snapped the internet in half. The one where Blueface tells the world he doesn't sleep with Nevaeh because she's too big for him. That is 6 full months of public deterioration. 6 months. Read it again. 6 months from Blueface baby revealed to she's too big for me to sleep with. That is not a slow burn. That is not a relationship arc. That is a content decay curve. The exact shape streaming analysts chart when a franchise starts hemorrhaging subs off camera, away from the ring lights. And the runway that led into this stretch was already lit up with warning signs. Blueface paternity history alone reads like a class action complaint waiting to be certified. Jaden Alexis's kids. The Krisian comments about adding other women. The live-streamed conversations about which associates might be sleeping with whom. To parachute a Blueface baby pregnancy reveal into that biography and expect the internet to treat it like a fairy tale was, in retrospect, a bet placed directly against the historical record. And the historical record wins on schedule. It always does. Now drop Taboo's arrival into the middle of that timeline. Taboo doesn't step in first. Taboo steps in after the cheating admission. After the face tattoo reveal from Krisian. After the Krisian reveal from Blueface's own mouth. Taboo's warning did not launch this storm. The warning landed inside a storm that was already forming. And that sequencing matters more than most commentators are giving it credit for. Because in every scandal cycle I have ever broken down on this channel, the person you assume kicked the whole thing off almost never actually did. Kickoffs happen in whispers. What we call the start of a beef is usually beat 3 or beat 4. The moment somebody with a real platform finally says out loud what the group chats have been passing around for weeks. Taboo is not the start of the Nevaeh narrative. Taboo is the ratification of it. Taboo is the algorithm needed to give the pre-existing chatter permission to become mainstream commentary. And that distinction is doing a lot of heavy lifting on this arc. Look at what was already sitting there before Taboo ever pressed record. The deleted Nevaeh stories that fan pages screen-capped and reshared into commentary channels. The alleged text thread leaks. The polar relationship clips floating around in the comments for months. Every one of those artifacts existed pre-Taboo. Taboo did not create the discourse. Taboo put a name on the discourse. And in the influencer economy, naming a discourse is roughly 80% of the win. Now here is where it gets loud. Every man Nevaeh has publicly separated from, first baby father included, Krisian adjacent, has been characterized on her lives as some flavor of gay, broke, or lying. Taboo's whole argument isn't that Nevaeh is a bad person. Taboo's argument is that this is the shape. You leave, Nevaeh narrates you, and Blueface, in Taboo's read, is next in that rotation the second the cameras stop rolling. That is not a coincidence claim. That is a pattern claim. And those are two very different animals. A coincidence claim collapses under one single counterexample. A pattern claim survives dozens. That is why pattern claims are so much harder to dismiss than they look. And it is exactly why platforms full of loud men are so bad at making them. Most exes swing for coincidence. She did this to me on this day. Taboo swung for pattern. Nevaeh has done this shape to every man before Taboo, and Nevaeh will do it to the next man after. Whether the pattern is real or whether Taboo reverse-engineered it is a completely fair open question. But the rhetorical upgrade is undeniable. Taboo built an argument the reposting economy could scale. The receipts Taboo references, the deleted stories, the polar relationship videos, the first baby father posts, the HMG orbit screenshots, they all exist. Whether they mean what Taboo says they mean is a whole other courtroom. But the timeline itself is not clean for Blueface. And not clean is doing a lot of load-bearing work here. Because Blueface's defense strategy, historically, has always leaned on chaos. Chaos is Blueface's brand equity. Chaos is why every wild interview goes viral. Chaos is why every rushed repost prints. But chaos as a parasocial and legal strategy has a ceiling, and the ceiling is called pattern recognition. Once the audience can predict your chaos, the chaos stops paying you. Taboo's clip did something rhetorically brutal. Taboo lowered the ceiling of Blueface chaos by inviting the audience to see the pattern Blueface is on, not just the one Taboo claims Nevaeh is on. Mirror meets mirror. Now, 3 things nobody in the reposting economy is dissecting properly. Buckle up. 1. The phrasing. Taboo does not once call Nevaeh a manipulator. Taboo does not use that word. Not once. Taboo uses the word trained. Specifically, in Taboo's frame, Nevaeh is a trained woman who knows how to make every man she likes feel great. Read that word choice again. That is not a slur. That is a job description. Taboo is framing Nevaeh as skilled labor inside a media ecosystem where every other ex-boyfriend usually goes full character assassination. That one word, trained, reads clinical, almost admiring. That is a tell. Trained is the linguistic center of the whole clip, and nobody is ranking it high enough. Because trained implies a trainer. Trained implies a syllabus. Trained implies a prior life in which those skills were acquired under someone else's roof, on someone else's clock, for somebody else's benefit. It is the one word in the whole monologue that quietly redirects the accusation away from Nevaeh as origin, and toward a set of upstream conditions that shaped Nevaeh. And that redirect, whether Taboo meant it or not, is the exact reason the clip lands as commentary instead of slander. Taboo is describing an ecosystem, not a person. 2. The father line. Taboo repeats it 3 separate times in the same clip. Not twice. 3. Every single loop back is to the argument that a woman who does not respect her own father cannot respect a man she meets in her 20s. Taboo is not delivering a moral judgment. Taboo is telegraphing a defense. If this ever goes legal, and with Blueface history it absolutely might, that single line becomes the pre-installed argument for why any accusation Nevaeh makes against Blueface reads as unreliable narration in a courtroom. And watch that phrasing get quietly recycled by somebody else in the coming weeks. Bet. 3 repetitions is not conversational. 3 repetitions is rehearsed. In broadcast training, they call it the rule of 3, because the third repetition is when a phrase migrates from something a speaker said to something an audience remembers a speaker meaning. Politicians live on it. Cult leaders live on it. And apparently rappers doing kick monologues about their exes live on it too. What Taboo did with the father line wasn't emphasis. It was installation. Taboo installed that phrase so completely that when Blueface's eventual legal team reaches for it, and they will, if it goes there, the phrase will already be waxed, dusted, and ready to cite. Also, notice what the father line does not do. It doesn't accuse Nevaeh of anything Blueface hasn't already been publicly accused of himself. It doesn't call Nevaeh a liar. It doesn't call Nevaeh dishonest. It says Nevaeh cannot respect a man she meets in her 20s because Nevaeh does not respect the first man she was ever supposed to respect. That is not a character claim. That is a sequence claim. And sequence claims, again, are much harder to disprove than character claims. You can produce 100 witnesses to a person's character. You cannot produce witnesses to the interior state of a father-daughter relationship. It is an unfalsifiable frame parked directly under Nevaeh's credibility. 3. The dead homies line. Taboo casually drops that Nevaeh's first sexualized conversation with someone allegedly opened with a line invoking a deceased family member. Taboo laughs it off almost affectionately, but Taboo attaches it to a claim that Nevaeh has been active since 12 or 13 years old. And Taboo lays the responsibility for that at the feet of someone inside her own family. That is the darkest 3 seconds of the entire clip. And Taboo blinks right past it. Nobody in the reposting economy is touching that beat. It is too heavy for the algorithm. But if we were mapping this story honestly, that is where the actual human tragedy lives. And I had to rewind that section twice. Not for content. For breathing room. Rewinding for breathing room is a phrase I use maybe once a year on this channel, and I am using it here on purpose, because that beat is where the clip stops being tabloid and starts becoming testimony. Testimony deserves a different register than tabloid does. If any part of what Taboo said in those 3 seconds is grounded, and I cannot verify it and will not try, then we are not looking at a love triangle story or a content economy story. We are looking at a harm chain. A chain in which a child was let down by the first man she was supposed to be able to trust, and every subsequent man in her orbit has been reacting to and profiting from the shape that first betrayal left behind. That is not a story the reposting economy is built to hold. That is not a story a 5-minute kick clip is built to hold either. But it is the story sitting directly underneath the clip. And if we do not name it, we are just running the same cycle in the same clothes. Naming it does not fix it. Refusing to name it makes us complicit in whatever the next cycle turns into. Big breath. Back to the ledger. Real talk. Look at how the outlets are actually covering this. Complex has been running the entire Nevaeh and Blueface arc as a Blueface accountability story. The pregnancy. The cheating admission. The Krasian comments. Their frame keeps Blueface as the antagonist and barely mentions Taboo at all. The Shade Room is running it as ensemble drama. Krasian, Jaden, Nevaeh, all orbiting one man. And TSR is treating Taboo as a supporting extra, not a lead. Which is a choice. TMZ has taken the Blueface said something outrageous angle. Pure clip farming. Zero interest in the X. 3 outlets. 3 different frames. 1 shared blind spot. The X. And that blind spot is doing invisible work. Because as long as the story is Blueface behaving badly, Nevaeh reads as victim. The moment Taboo enters the frame, the story becomes pattern of relationships, and the moral geometry of the entire cycle shifts. Media outlets are not stupid. Media outlets know which version scrolls. Look closer at why each outlet is dodging the X angle, because the incentives are not identical and they are not accidental. Complex is a music publication, and the industry has a working relationship with Blueface as a bookable, monetizable entity. Complex's posture always tilts toward Blueface being the story, because Blueface is the SEO. Adding Taboo dilutes the search term equity of the piece. Complex has no commercial reason to promote a name that is not already trending in Spotify metadata. That is not journalistic malpractice. That is page view arithmetic. But it means Complex's framing is structurally biased toward centering the man with the streaming numbers, who in this case happens to be the man whose behavior is under review. The Shade Room has different math. Their model is ensemble. More characters in a frame, more comments per post. So TSR is incentivized to spread the frame wide. Krasian, Jaden, Nevaeh. A 5-person tag graph beats a 2-person tag graph on virality every single time. But Taboo does not fit the ensemble because Taboo introduces a thesis, and a thesis collapses ensemble drama into single narrator drama. TSR does not want a narrator. TSR wants a chorus. TMZ's incentive is the simplest and the loudest. Clip farm. 1 outrageous sentence per hit, packaged as a headline, aggregated by every morning show desk in the country. Nevaeh's X does not produce that. Nevaeh's X produces paragraphs. Paragraphs die on the TMZ homepage. So Taboo's clip, no matter how load-bearing it is for the actual center of gravity of the story, will never lead there. And here comes the loudest counter-narrative you'll find in any comments section this week. Simple. Taboo is a clout-chasing ex who got dropped and is rewriting history now that Nevaeh is carrying Blueface's baby. I hear it. I hear the skepticism. Taboo is dropping this while Nevaeh is pregnant. Taboo is using Nevaeh's name for reach. But Steelman the argument and it still breaks. A clout chaser leads with a diss track. Taboo led with a warning aimed at another man. That is a different play entirely. That is an I know what you are about to go through because I lived it play. And if it were pure clout, Taboo wouldn't have gone weeks between statements. Taboo would be posting daily. Taboo didn't. So it isn't clean. Nothing about this arc is clean. Which is exactly why the takes coming out of the reposting economy this week have been so weirdly unstable. Watch any single commentator across 3 consecutive uploads on this arc, and their position slides. Day 1, pro-Taboo. Day 3, pro-Nevaeh. Day 5, back to everybody in this story is dirty. That instability is not laziness. That instability is what happens when the incentives on every side of a story are commercially aligned to keep the story unresolved. Nobody in the reposting economy is being paid to close this case. Everybody is being paid to keep it open. So the takes stay open too. That is a market failure dressed as discourse. Now here is the read the algorithm does not want you to sit with. Every commentator is covering this like a love triangle story. It is not. Look closer. This is a content economics story, and every single player in it, Taboo included, Nevaeh included, Blueface included, Whack 100 stepping in on the kick stream to demand answers included, is being paid directly in attention capital to keep the paternity question alive. Taboo said it himself, plain as day. They are making money off speaking on him. Taboo is not wrong. Taboo is also participating. And here is the harder read. Blueface and his camp already know the DNA answer, or they are 90% sure they do. Because, as Taboo pointed out on the same clip, you can run a non-invasive prenatal paternity test as early as week 7. Nevaeh has been publicly pregnant since February. That is plenty of runway. If Blueface's camp wanted certainty, they would already have certainty. What they want instead is a reveal moment. A monetizable birth. A DNA envelope opened on a live stream, timed to a project drop. Which means every day the doubt stays alive is a day the numbers stay up. Once you strip the personalities out, the economic architecture of this feud resembles nothing so much as a prediction market. Every stakeholder, the ex, the manager, the mother figure, the associates, the mother of the earlier children, the ambient reaction channels, is either short or long on a specific outcome. Blueface is long on ambiguity, because ambiguity funds the crisis-adjacent narrative. WAC 100 is long on drama, because drama funds the podcast slot. Krizian is short on Nevaeh, because a discredited Nevaeh cleans up Blueface's earlier chapters retroactively. Jaden is long on the affair, because affair adjacency renews her own coverage cycle. Taboo is long on pattern, because pattern insulates Taboo against the counterswing. And Nevaeh, the only unlisted stock in this entire market, is short on all of it. Every position on the board pays out somewhere. Except hers. Taboo threading himself into that timeline this exact week, right as Blueface's TMZ stock is at peak volatility, is not just personal. Whether Taboo means it to be or not, it is market timing. Taboo's warning benefits from Blueface's chaos. Blueface's chaos benefits from Taboo's noise. They are mutual liquidity providers for each other's brands. That is not romance. That is not even beef. That is a supply chain. Supply chain is the exact right word. And I want to sit on it for a second, because we are watching the maturation of a genre that used to be called rap beef and now functions closer to what business school people call a co-op. A cooperative distribution network in which nominal rivals share infrastructure. Blueface antics feed Taboo's platform. Taboo's monologue feeds Blueface's news cycle. WAC 100's outrage feeds both. TSR aggregates all three. And the audience buys the aggregation. Nobody in this chain is unhappy with the arrangement, because the arrangement pays every single node. The only nodes not being paid proportionally are the nodes carrying the human risk. The pregnant woman. The unborn child. The older kids in adjacent households who will grow up Googling this arc. Those nodes bear the downstream cost, and they hold none of the upside. That is the actual asymmetry of this cycle. And it is the asymmetry the content economy is structurally incapable of correcting for, because correcting for it would require the storytellers to become the story. No storyteller in this game has ever agreed to that trade. Now watch me twist the knife. Here comes the jab the industry will not throw. Nevaeh is the only person in this entire equation who is not being paid proportionally to the risk she is carrying. Blueface has streaming revenue. WAC 100 has the podcast. Krizian has an entire sub-industry. Taboo has his platform. Nevaeh has a growing belly inside a comment section debating her father's parenting. That is the asymmetry. That is the story. The trained comment stings, because from a certain angle, trained is also the only economic role Nevaeh has ever been offered. Not defending it. Diagnosing it. Quiet on that, because the diagnosis, if you take it seriously, indicts an entire genre of celebrity manufacturing. The genre that recruits young women into proximity with older men, monetizes their attachment styles, brands their disputes, farms their pregnancies, and quietly reassigns them when the numbers cool. That is not a Blueface problem. That is not a Nevaeh problem. That is a category problem. And every viral clip in this cycle is a symptom of the category still functioning exactly the way it was designed to function. Naming the design doesn't dismantle the design. But refusing to name it is how the design keeps hiring. Now watch how the DNA reveal is about to get stage managed. It is about to be event television. Literally. Expect the reveal to happen on a live stream. Expect it to drop when a Blueface project needs a bump. And expect at least one third party to leak partial results ahead of the announcement, to force everybody's hand. If the timeline holds and Nevaeh's due window is narrowing into the fall, you are looking at a fourth quarter media event tied directly to a music release. That is not paranoia. That is promo cycle math. It gets boring once you learn it. Album announcement lands 6 weeks before drop. Single lands 3 weeks before drop. Feature confirmations trickle in the final 2. A tabloid controversy sitting inside that window boosts opening week streams by a factor small enough to deny and large enough to matter. The DNA reveal, if it lands inside a promotional window, will not be an accident. It will be release strategy. And the paperwork will confirm it after the fact, when the timelines get lined up side by side and the coincidence stops being credible. Watch also for the pre-echoes in the 2 weeks before the reveal. Expect a wave of insider clips claiming to already know the result. Some pro Blueface. Some anti-Nevaeh. Those clips are trial balloons. They are being sent out to measure audience response so the actual reveal can be staged into whichever result generates the biggest emotional wave. That is not conspiracy. That is just how modern reveals get A/B tested. Ask any streamer who has watched a beef unfold in slow motion. The trial balloons always come first. In the next 30 days, expect a Nevaeh response, and I would bet money it will not be a stream. Expect an edited sit-down response. Probably vertical. Probably shot inside the house. Nevaeh is smart enough to know Taboo's clip is doing damage. Nevaeh will counter the father angle first, because that is where Nevaeh is most exposed, and Nevaeh knows attacking the wound is the only way to close it. And Nevaeh will allegedly go at Taboo's finances to muddy the never asked you for money claim. An edited response, if Nevaeh lands it, is a stylistic pivot from the live rant format Nevaeh has been operating in for months. That pivot will be received as either a maturation moment or a management moment, depending entirely on how good the editing is. If the cuts are seamless and the lighting is intentional, commentary flips within 48 hours toward Nevaeh is finally being handled properly. If the cuts are ragged, you will see the opposite. Nevaeh recorded it on her phone. No team. Nevaeh is alone. Which reading gets amplified will tell you exactly who is still in Nevaeh's camp financially. Watch the credits, even the invisible ones. The aftershock 5 years out is the ugly one. If the DNA test comes back not Blueface, and Taboo's framing has already planted that seed, Nevaeh becomes the next cautionary tale era, replayed on every reaction channel until the phrase Blueface baby becomes shorthand for something else entirely. That is cultural residue, and cultural residue does not wash off. And the child born inside that reveal inherits a Google search result before that child inherits a name. Cultural residue is what remains in the sediment after the story stops being a story. It is the reason a certain era of tabloid coverage still haunts the search results of women who were teenagers in the 2000s. It is the reason a name attached to a scandal in 2011 still auto-completes with the scandal in 2026. Residue does not discriminate between the guilty and the incidental. It coats them equally. And the child at the center of this arc, whoever the biological father turns out to be, will inherit a residue-coated childhood by no fault of anyone who consented to that inheritance. That is the piece the reposting economy will never price in, because pricing it in would require slowing down. Slowing down is the one thing the model cannot afford to do. Blueface loses either way, by the way. Positive test. Blueface is tethered to a woman he has already publicly humiliated and cheated on, inside a monetized partnership past the point of any repair. Negative test. Blueface is the guy who spent 9 months building a brand around a baby that wasn't his. And every clip of Blueface calling it a Blueface baby becomes a receipt against him. Both losses are permanent, in different ways. The positive test loss is a long, slow drag on Blueface's brand. Every future feature. Every future collab. Every future Krasian joke. Every one of them will get run through the filter of you cheated on your pregnant partner on Kick. The negative test loss is faster and more brutal. A single news cycle of humiliation. A few years of remember when. And then a graveyard of clips that resurface every time Blueface tries to reintroduce himself. Neither loss offers Blueface a clean exit. The only exit that would have been clean was silence months ago. Silence is the one product Blueface has never sold. Taboo doesn't win exactly. But Taboo does what Taboo came to do. Taboo inserts his name into the record so that whatever happens next, Taboo's warning gets cited. That is legacy insurance in the content economy. Cheap to acquire. Valuable if the story ever breaks Taboo's way. Legacy insurance is the actual product being sold in this cycle, and Taboo bought the cheapest, best-timed policy on the market. 2 or 3 weeks of silence to accrue credibility. A single monologue to establish the thesis. A refusal to follow up daily to preserve the Comsource register. If the story breaks Taboo's way, every reaction channel in the country will recut Taboo's clip with a "he tried to warn him" overlay, and Taboo's name will be permanently attached to the arc as the prescient one. If the story breaks against Taboo, Taboo goes back to being a footnote and loses nothing Taboo was not already going to lose. The upside is asymmetric. The downside is capped. That is textbook insurance. Taboo wrote the policy on himself. Watch the ledger, not the drama. The ledger is where the story actually lives. The drama is where the story gets sold. Confusing the two is the most common mistake commentators make on cycles like this, and it is the exact mistake I have been trying to unlearn every week I sit down to record. Every beef is a business. Every reveal is a release. Every silence is a strategy. Every X is a stakeholder. And the audience, us, me, you, the person watching this at 2 in the morning, is not the customer. We are the product. The customer is the platform paying out to whoever keeps us watching longest. Which means the honest question at the end of every cycle like this one is not who is right. The honest question is who is being paid, and by whom, to make me feel this way right now. Ask that question in the middle of every clip you consumed this week, and watch the story rearrange itself in real time. Faces you thought were antagonists reveal themselves as vendors. Faces you thought were victims reveal themselves as inventory. Faces you thought were narrators reveal themselves as owners. Once you can see the ledger, you cannot unsee it. Same way I cannot unsee that Taboo clip. That is the part that has me typing this at 2 in the morning, y'all. So here is where I leave y'all. Does Nevaeh stay quiet, ride the pregnancy out, and let the DNA envelope do the talking while Blueface digs his own hole one kick stream at a time? Or does Nevaeh do what Nevaeh has always done best, sit down in front of a ring light, and torch the entire board on her own timeline? Personally, I think Nevaeh picks a random Tuesday, drops an edited sit-down, and the internet loses its collective mind before lunch. But that is my read on Nevaeh. Drop your read in the comments below. Paternity math. Prescient warning or clout-chasing X-bulletin or bombshell. I am reading every reply, and the follow-up is already in the pipeline. Tap that subscribe. Turn that bell on. Do not miss the part 2, because baby, this one is not over. This one is barely started.